Yeah, sorry.
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Okay, where are we? We're at services as software-enabled revenues. Is that the right one? Yay, okay. It's been a day. So those of you who were in the other room this morning had the pleasure of hearing from Maite. And so I won't take time to recognize her again, but thank you for moderating this panel. We also have Jeremy Parker, who's the group leader for connected services, software, and electronics with Polestar. Thank you for joining. Mark Gerban is remote and coming in. He is a senior digital and payment expert representing himself today. And then Scott Lyons is in-vehicle content services and tech partnerships and co-founder of Ford Make It Drivable program at Ford Motor Company, Europe. Did I get everybody? All right. So we're going to make this happen here. Thank you for organizing this panel, and we're going to hand it off to you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. I think the main reason why we're having this panel is, I don't know if you had the opportunity to see the presentation early today about software-defined vehicles, but when we think about this future that will be software-driven, we see a significant opportunity, revenues opportunity after the sale of the vehicle, so then delivering new experiences to the user. And we today have this amazing panel to discuss how to materialize this opportunity. And well, I have a question then for the panelists, and I will start with Jeremy. So Jeremy, I would really like to understand, are we at a stage where, do we have a clear understanding on what kind of services and experiences must be integrated into vehicles, or are we still learning what actually deliver value to the final customers?
Yeah, it's talking from a Polestar perspective, that's a good question. And Polestar has, well, we've been around for a while, actually. It's funny enough, it was started off as a performance brand, providing the software upgrades, actually, performance upgrades for Volvo. So actually, that was something we learned as a company, that yes, you can earn money by customers can pay for a performance upgrade of the software to your Volvo. So that fundamentally was the foundation for the company, and then naturally building up, that was 2009, but then building up in 2017 with the Polestar 2 and actually having a vehicle, the Polestar 2. And of course, yeah, we're getting to learn about what our customers want. You can order a performance upgrade, so that's where we're getting a revenue from software when it comes to our software. But there's a lot to learn, and we've got downloadable apps. We've got the possibilities to integrate third parties, but there's a great lot of things to learn.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, I don't know, Mark and Scott, were you able to listen to the question?
Yeah, I think from that side, if we're talking about where things are with regards to where the industry is, it's really far behind, like really far behind. I think it's like kind of comparing the Industrial Revolution with like the digital age. We're playing major catch-up. There's a lot of, let's say, user experiences and interfaces that are using like old school approaches, which, from my opinion, even when I see some of the presentations today, I see stuff where still it's kind of like the old train of thought versus like where digital companies are taking a look at big internet like Apple, Google, online games companies. They have such amazing technologies, and then we move to the OEM space. And then I hate to be critical on this for everyone, but I think one of the major pieces is that we kind of, I guess, underestimate the actual challenge and overestimate where we currently are. And I mean that in like a productive, constructive way, that we need to look more in a direction where you're building experiences that are not made for a phone, but made for a car, right? So at least from that side, that's where I kind of feel like we're currently sitting, and we're probably saying, I would say a healthy transition. It's getting to that point, but we still have a ways to go.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just a short follow-up, Mark. I agree with you, and obviously let's not all agree with each other during this panel, but I think there is an opportunity here, right? Which is there is a long road ahead. I think, customers need to understand that we're clearly going through a transition on multiple fronts as an industry. There's new entrants, new people coming into the industry, new people coming into work in automotive. And I think that kind of fresh approach, fresh eyes is really helping. I look at this as automakers need to be brave. They need to kind of take some risks, try things out, fail fast. You could put all of the usual spin words here. But I do think the concept of automotive grade needs to be rethought, perhaps, when it comes to services, where we need to kind of look at taking, Mark, what you had said, which is what makes sense for the vehicle, right? When you sit in the car and you're driving, for example, I have less patience. I don't want to be searching endlessly for things. I want the vehicle to learn. I want it to push experiences to me versus me kind of pulling them. And I think there is an enormous opportunity here. And that's what I try to articulate on a daily basis, working with different partners, whether it be startups or scale-ups or corporate partners, to kind of look at the automotive opportunity as get in on the ground level, because that is exactly where we are.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for this. Very interesting views. So I think we all agree that there is an enormous opportunity, but we need to be able to address it and do things differently. So I would like to hear from you then. How do you start doing things differently? How do you start gathering insights on how the users use the in-vehicle experience, what has higher engagement, what actually works and what doesn't in the car? Let's start.
Yeah, that's a question on how to do things. And when it comes to the sort of the legacy of Polestar and understanding, well, how do you sort of suddenly become a new car brand and get those type of insights? I mean, we are part of the Geely Group, so we utilize a lot of synergies, and together with Volvo, we've helped with the turnkey projects that we have, and we're just launching now this week. You've probably seen in the Shanghai Motor Show in Beijing, the Polestar 4, which we're doing together with our colleagues in China. So we got a white sheet of paper, so to say, when we started the company, but then we've had the opportunities to leverage a lot of existing platforms. But then within my area of connected experience, we see the opportunities to learn by doing, putting in innovative projects and working with Google as with the platform we have. So third-party developers can actually come in and do their work, or they actually develop, and we do co-development and put in applications such as like a web browser Vivaldi or other systems that we have with wireless car, for example, for route planning. So we get a lot of insights in our customers through those type of collaborations.
Phenomenal. Thank you. Mark, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we highly underestimate is the data challenge. So there's a lot of data. So everyone talks about, like, for example, and I'll start with smartphones because it's a really good, like, starting point. People are currently going like, wow, Facebook, Google, all the other major internet companies are able to track us so well. And that's just on a phone. Imagine what happens when you start being able to track what's going on in the vehicle in a much more thorough way with, like, body positioning or people who are sitting. You come to a completely different kind of level of customization. And I think that when you start looking at this kind of customization, this creates a new kind of ecosystem, which is more or less what drives you into providing certain types of content. So the vehicle becomes, it moves from a direction of being a driver, no pun intended, but being a driver of, movement to a driver of entertainment. And I think that what we're going to see there is that through these different interactions that you have with your customers, and it's going to move from just the driver to also who's sitting in the passenger seat, who's sitting in the back. Clear, easy examples are like, I have kids sitting in the back, and if I know the weight, size, dimension of who's sitting there, I have screens maybe they're sitting back there, and I can deliver then certain specific content that can go to them. So I think a lot of this stuff really has to do with the fact that for us to get kind of like to that next stage, we have to look at things from a much broader ecosystem kind of scenario. I think we've made like baby steps towards that direction. And there are definitely building blocks. But for what I liked that Scott said earlier is you got to take risks. You got to go out there and take smart risks. So don't do the stuff that's going to get you in trouble with your legal. Don't do the stuff that's going to, be like super duper way out of the ordinary, which can break laws. But I would say the risks that are smart, that are within the boundaries of what you can do, that's our sandbox. That's what we should be playing with. And I think that if the industry took that more in the direction of, let's say, a literal stance, we'd see a lot more movement into that kind of change that we need.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, Mark, what you had said is really interesting in terms of, I mean, historically, automakers have kind of treated the driver on its own with passenger and backseat completely divorced from the experience, right? Where, you could just look at many examples of, an experience that lives in the backseat, but actually has no connection to what's actually happening in the front. And I think that needs to stop, because that's obviously not the way that our customers use their vehicles. The other thing that I think is interesting, and I know, Mark, this really hits in terms of where your sweet spot is obviously from a payment perspective. So, without going into details around specific things in this right this minute, but I think what we are really starting to think about is the kind of business models and the commercial, let's say, subscription opportunities that obviously people consume outside of the vehicle. Does that make sense, lock, stock, to be kind of adopted in the vehicle? My personal perspective is not necessarily as a whole. I think that there's an enormous opportunity, especially when you think about how people use their vehicles. So as an example, and I love this example because it really hits home in terms of usage, which is, if you look at a commuter, they're obviously using their vehicle to go back and forth between the office, if they indeed go to the office these days. But then perhaps maybe 2 or 3 weeks during the summer, at least here in Europe, you take your vehicle with your family and you go off and you do a road trip. Now, obviously, you're going to be spending a lot more time in the vehicle during those 3 weeks. Maybe you actually want to consume content, or you want to consume services that you may not want to do or consume or pay for in your normal kind of day-to-day activities. So we should be more open-minded. And obviously, this is going to take some heavy lifting as an industry to work with, whether it be media companies, entertainment companies, or services, to bring those in so that there are more options available. And I think that is something that I'm determined that we try and kind of push through, because I think we need to test and we need to learn. Adoption is critical here. And I think also, what makes sense in the vehicle may not make sense while you're sitting on your sofa.
Yeah, I could just carry on from that, some of the stuff you say, Scott, there about bridging the gaps with the different industries we're in. So the traditional automotive industry getting you from A to B. We've been talking as well to companies providing media content. So like, say, for example, like the commute, the 10-minute commute. You want something that can, give you your news and weather. We can provide the information to say it's a 10-minute journey, because that's the information that comes from us. And we collaborate with partners then that can provide us a 10-minute adapted thing. So it's about overbridging that gap and finding the opportunities. And we're going as well, like failing fast as well. First attempt in learning. Let's push out something, try it, and if it doesn't work, maybe they'll uninstall the app, just like you do with your smartphones. Yeah, you don't have to push out something, but the important stuff needs to work. So if it's going to be something that's going to park your car, you don't want it back, getting stuck in the car park, like the Tesla example you might have seen online now, where it gets backwards and forwards. Those sort of things are failing, and they're very, that's very annoying. But let's get the right content to the right people.
Can I just add one thing here, which I think is a really interesting point, which is kind of, I think a lot of us come to the table with preconceived ideas around this isn't going to work, that isn't going to work. No one's going to go out and, sit in their vehicle and watch a movie, right? But that's what's happening in China. There are people that are going into their vehicles in their parking garages and watching in the perfect kind of Dolby Atmos sound, their favorite movie. So it's not far-fetched. An example that I had from one of my colleagues who was in a vehicle, charging in the middle of nowhere. She was thinking about purchasing a property in Spain, and so she went onto YouTube and started watching content on YouTube. She ended up spending over an hour watching that content in the middle of nowhere when she really only intended on watching and grazing for 5 minutes. And so I think we need to be more open-minded about what people will be doing in their vehicles when they can actually deliver a lot more than people have had people's experience have had so far. So that just, I think it's really important to hammer that home because it opens up a lot more opportunities.
Yeah, and I'd like to add on that. It's a really good point that entertainment is going to be one of the key drivers to helping bridge the changeover to electrification. And the main reason for that is that charging takes time. So people need to do stuff when they're sitting around and doing nothing. And it's very often that you see people looking at these as segmented different scenarios of like, entertainment is just entertainment. So like, I'm only going to watch when I'm doing one specific thing, which is driving, and people go, well, that's illegal and you can't do this. Yeah, of course. But when you're taking a look at different scenarios where you're sitting around in the middle of nowhere, and I think to Scott's point, you have something where you can watch something directly on the fly, and then maybe think of all other different types of scenarios. If you know the person's behavior, you could think about other e-commerce models that can fit. Think about what's kind of around. I think that it was Volvo last year that released it started a partnership with Starbucks. I think it's brilliant because you have charging stations, people are going to sit around, and then you get coffee right away. I mean, that's an absolute no-brainer when you start thinking about kind of the types of models that could start thinking in here. So I think people need to think a bit more about like less of this segmentation approach and more about combining multiple different experiences together to kind of get more of like a full immersed experience, right? So.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for this. I think one question I have, starting with Jeremy, because Polestar was one of the pioneers in bringing big tech into the automotive segment, to have a partnership, very successful partnership with Google. So I was wondering, when do you draw the line on whether you have to do in-house, when to bring expertise, and how do you maintain control over revenues moving forwards when you bring that many outsiders?
That's something we're getting to learn and understand, actually. So no, I haven't got any clear answers to that question. But it's about understanding where, to get, if you want a revenue stream, and to understand, in discussions we need to have with Google and payment and so on, and getting a standard for that, where who's earning money from this, and what type of services or what type of subscription models, or is it, I think we can come on to understanding really how do you get paid for what we do in a fair way. We pay the app developers, but how do OEMs and so on, and what's just bringing value to the car. It's like with the entertainment example, just an audio example is one thing. Last week, just for free, I thought, well, that's really interesting. I heard there's a fireplace just for free, and it's quite a cool thing to have in your car. So I downloaded, it's free, and it's sort of like these sort of gimmicky things sometimes that bring a value, but I think there must be a great opportunity to earn money as well from a lot of the services that we can offer.
Definitely. And I think moving to Mark as a specialist in payments, I was just wondering, your perspective on how do you think the business models are going to evolve in the future, if we can have a clear idea now, or if we're just learning? And also some insights on payments, which have been not very seamless in the vehicle so far. So how you expect that to move forward as well?
So I'd like to say that we don't have to look very far. We don't have to reinvent the wheel entirely, per se, with regards to at least certain types of models, and I'll get into payments, how it fits. But I think that now that the vehicles in general are starting to accommodate much bigger screens, you have much different types of experiences that you can have with regards to display. And if everyone thinks back to this good old thing called the internet, we start taking a look at, really basic stuff like banner campaigns, CPM, CPL, CPC kind of deals, which is basically when you click, when you view, all of this kind of stuff really is really basic stuff which Google makes their money on clicks, right? So when you start taking a look at how do you get customer engagement, you could start monetizing this kind of stuff. I was actually kind of curious, like at least on the Polestar side as well, I'm kind of like, okay, well, if you're working so closely with Google, how come they're not also, if they're going to be a service center for you, do they also generate you revenue? I mean, this is stuff that partners like that should be open for. So I think when you're taking a look at those kind of models, that's kind of one thing to think about. The other main piece is that, like, from a payments perspective, we're starting to take a look at all different kinds of experiences with regards to paying for kind of the no-brainer kind of thing. So anything that only fits with a car. And by that I mean parking, fueling, charging, car washing, as four main pillars. Even tolling is another scenario, right? And when you look at all of these things, they're obvious. They're things that you should basically be able to be like, okay, well, you know what? That experience really fits what I would only do in a car. So the question is, how do you make that experience intuitive enough that you'd actually want to pay for it? And funny enough is that a lot of companies have, I would sort of say in a very nice way, failed horribly at kind of making that transition because they don't understand payment infrastructure. Part of it has to do with the fact that they use infrastructure and a setup which basically works for maybe like certain online businesses that have millions or hundreds of millions or tens of millions of users, where OEMs in general don't have that luxury. They really have like a very small amount when you're comparing at least to car phones, to smartphones. So you're seeing yourself kind of like as an extension to those ecosystems, and you have billions in exposure in terms of user numbers when you're talking about smartphone users, but vehicles have a 1% figure of that at best. So you kind of have to figure out, okay, how can you become appealing enough that a smaller developer or mid-sized developer, whoever, even big guys, will want to stick their resources with you. And resources also include kind of like payment infrastructure. And I feel that there's a huge change in approach that's needed. And I've seen stuff that does work, let's just put it that way. But there's a huge change which really is needed to start working with external third parties. And I think that if we were going to start looking at different experiences, also having these third parties wanting to accommodate those experiences, you have to make the integration itself. We just saw the previous presentation, I think earlier. That's super complicated. It's a lot of work, right? Now, if I'm a developer and I have to implement this architecture, all of a sudden I'm spending a lot of time and a lot of resources where I'm losing a lot of other opportunities, maybe in the mobile space, which has a significant number more of users and better monetization potential. So I think like this bridge of simplified architecture, not just for the OEM, but also for the external third parties is highly needed if you really want to be successful, both on like the content providing side and also on the payment side.
Fantastic. Scott, would you like to add?
I don't think I have much to add. I think it's been covered, but I would just like to hammer home the point here, and it's really something that we're starting to kick around as we socialize with other OEMs at trade shows. Is how do we make it easier for companies that want to support automotive to actually help them do that? It is very, very, very challenging. Putting aside what operating system your infotainment system is running on. I think there needs to be some standards. Obviously, COVESA is doing a great job here. I think there's some other areas that we need to look at where there's some collaboration, considering, of course, the antitrust issue, which is always important. But I think there are ways that we as an industry can work together to try and create something that ultimately allows more service providers, more entertainment companies, whatever you want to call it, to support and get in on the automotive bandwagon. It is not easy. You compare the number of vehicles that any one of us as OEMs ship, it's peanuts in comparison to how many smart TVs are shipped or how many smartphones are shipped around the world. So we've got to consider that. We're not an easy sell. It's a nice to have at the moment, but not a critical piece. And I think we need to kind of work on that.
Yeah, Mark, you were touching on something there, which I think is interesting to know exactly about the transactions where they actually happen, where people are prepared to part their money. You know, from an OEM perspective, we want to know where should this be? Is it something? Should we be developing like the OEM wallet, or should we be pointing people to the places where things happen and where, you know? I think it'd be great to hear your experiences a little bit about what's a good thing to do there.
Yeah, great question. You know, one of the biggest, most obvious areas that felt, at least for me, the best place for placing services was not like because I think most OEMs actually approach this where they have like an app section. And if you take a look at where apps are buried, it's like 5 or 6 steps back. You actually have to actively look, you have to actively think. So let's say I have a person who's looking for parking, right? A person who's looking for parking, if they're going to think that deeply, will pull out their phone and be like, why do I need to use my car? Like, great that it has an app, but you know, that requires me to register. I have to jump like 15 steps which takes me like 20 minutes to do or something, and then I can finally get things going. That's a horrible experience, and then no one really uses those kind of products. So you kind of want to think about it more like, okay, can I, for my ecosystem, take a look at you know, single sign-on experiences? For me, if I was working at Google, you know, I come from big internet, so it's a very big, obvious win. They should be using single sign-on. It's like, you know, you have a huge win with using single sign-on. Of course, today you can have some variances with that with Android Auto, but my opinion would also be is like, you know, the placement of the service, whether we're talking about the really basics. So basics for me means anything that you can place on a map, right? The number one place where most customers are going to look, or most drivers are going to look, is not going to be in their app section. It's not going to be really in their radio section. It's going to be on their navigation system. And if we're taking a look at traffic, there's the concept that, you know, Google is the master in, as an example, and driving traffic to specific locations is literally the same as me driving traffic from a web page to another web page. That's how Google makes their money. You know, you go on the search page, you click on a button, and you're directed to an optimal place, or you get to actively engage with a service. My strong opinion is that you place the services not in a separate area that no one's going to engage with, but place them actively in navigation. So Google, and I'll say Apple has this capability as well. I would take the map services that you have them embedded into the services. I would actually take Apple Pay, Google Pay, whatever the heck is there. You have a single sign-in experience, and you can just destroy the market. That would be probably one of the best user experiences you could possibly have, because they're integrated already with all the app experiences. You have one single sign-on scenario, you have one payment experience, and you own the customer that way. So I would say there's a lot more leverage there that could be done. And then when you have all that combined, you can have an awesome monetization system. You just need to know how the inner workings for that, but you can have all different kinds of things, from cost per install for apps. You can have cost per user engagement. You can have all different kinds of extensions. And none of this stuff right now, you know, people are really thinking about really so deeply, I think. And maybe some are in this audience, so I apologize if I offend anyone here. But I think, like in general, like this stuff is not really actively done very well. And that could be kind of the game-changing stuff that would really, you know, improve not just the user experience, but all of a sudden open this huge amount of capability for OEMs to digitize, well, basically monetize their digital channels.
Well, can I just, Mark, question? So I think what you're hitting on here is really just moving away from this siloed experience, right? Open and close, which really doesn't work in the automotive space, right? Obviously, for example, you know, your example, you pull into a spot. Wouldn't it be nice if, you know, something pops up on your screen and says, would you like to pay for parking? That would be a surprise and delight. Absolutely. Thank you very much. Without me really having to do anything. And I think that's where you start to think about stitching things together, right? Removing the kind of individual, you know, experiences. Some of them need to be individual, of course, but there's other things that really belong together. And I think that's a really strong, you articulated it well. And I think that's a space that needs to be, you know, focused on more.
Thanks. Yeah. I mean,
it's a pain point, right?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing is that developers have no issues at all being like, oh, Google or Google has the Play Store, Apple has the App Store, and they have unbelievably scalable architecture. I see today with OEMs, for example, I need to use test benches to test, let's say, certain types of software, whereas Apple, if you have, for example, Xcode on your computers, you literally can test every single solitary device and try every single compatibility aspect directly on your computer without having any hardware at all, outside of, obviously, the computer. I think that's such a huge plus for the user experience, but also it allows developers to have the right tools to want to develop further in a much easier way rather than like the OEM accessibility problem. I mean, how many of us here always say, okay, well, we need to have like test cars or test vehicles or test benches, and they're not available. I think it's a horrible problem, and it just gives no incentive or motivation for these developers to want to work with OEMs, where I think just Apple and Google are a very clear way to solve that problem.
Yeah, and that's something we covered on yesterday's in the deep dive in the COVESA side. Actually, is this need for the emulators. There is we're very much proactive in Polestar that you can download the emulator, you can develop your apps, but there needs to be a standard in this so that you can, the app developers can get something platform hardware agnostic, so that you can actually test and get stuff out. So to follow in a similar methodology as Mark's outlining.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for this. Being conscious of the time, I was just wondering if the audience has any questions to our panelists.
So we have been talking very much about services in the vehicle. I would be interested in your thoughts about services outside the vehicle that run in the cloud but use data from the vehicle to improve the experience. Are you also planning on going in that direction?
Okay, maybe I could just... Yeah.
I guess who's going to go for this?
We're thinking, who's biting? Who's biting?
yeah, Scott, go for it first. Go on.
Oh, okay. Why not? Why not? I'll take a stab at it. Obviously, the cloud, vehicle data, I'm not entirely sure, there's obviously different use cases, but something doesn't necessarily pop to mind. But there clearly is a business case here for, vehicle data obviously powering certain experiences or obviously coming out of the vehicle, going to the cloud. And, obviously let's not talk about insurance or frankly, any of those things, because obviously those are well and truly there. I think clearly what we need to think about here is data obviously has value, but naturally there's a lot of concern about, who has access to this data. What is it being used for? We clearly don't want to lose the trust of our customers. But I think once you check all those boxes, I think if a valuable experience that exists outside of the vehicle that clearly can come from the vehicle's data, then, I think we would be game for that. Question is, what is it and what makes sense? I think I've somewhat answered your question, but I'm giving a politically correct answer to that, but it's a hot topic. Data. Mark, you look like you want to answer. I mean, you're sitting in the sun in Hamburg, I think, right? So
yeah,
you want to answer.
Yeah, really. Well, actually, what's interesting, the very obvious use case in that scenario, Scott pointed out, which is insurance, massive potential, just because taking that data, being able to use it in other cross-channel scenarios of insurance, like knowing a driver's profile also might help sell life insurance, might sell other types of insurance as well. So that's kind of a cross-channel scenario just in that one situation. There are other scenarios, for example, with food delivery. It's a hybrid scenario. So I can have a situation where I order something in the vehicle, and when I order something in the vehicle, I can end up having it has to jump out of the vehicle into my phone, maybe to pick it up. In that sense, if I walk into the restaurant, how they identify me. Could be maybe done with you know, if you have someone who's actually wants to take like a picture of you, there's years ago, Square came out with a payment solution where you could walk into the store, they'd have a picture of you when you order something ahead. And to have that, you need to have a data connection, which connects out of your ecosystem, so out of the vehicle, like I've just heard. And then that's pushed into the restaurant or whoever's location. So the person doesn't really always need to have their device with them to authenticate, but then you need to have the transference of this data to have that situation happen. I think there's a lot of different types of use cases. The big thing is, you know, for the person who asked the question, I think the bigger question is the incentive and why an OEM would do that. I think that's the bigger question. And one of those scenarios is that you need to incentivize, one, the OEM to do so. Why would that make sense? Because there's usually like an added value for the user or the customer. And there's also the monetization incentive. If you think about you're passing information to an external party, you're giving that information away, you now create a referral kind of system. And referral systems, I think all of us know way back in the day from when there used to be like referral agreements, they sort of still exist in a way today. People made money with them. And they were based on all different types of constructs. Could be like a fixed fee, could be a percentage model, could be anything. All of these things, I think, are things that would help facilitate that kind of business model from being open. But of course, you have to be transparent to the user, explain everything. So it's, you know, in accordance with data protection, all that good stuff. But there are use cases.
I actually have one use case that just came to mind that I think is important. Let me just lay this out for the audience. So I remember a couple of years ago, there was a company out of Israel, a startup, that was able to, and they did this with the national healthcare in Israel, where basically if you had an accident, the vehicle sent along the impact, you know, obviously, you know, depending upon the impact, obviously depends on what kind of care that you receive right there on the spot from the ambulance. So that information was being shared. It was being then given to the ambulance that was coming to rescue you or to help you. And that information was very valuable, of course, to potentially save your life, to not move you in the wrong way or whatever. I would look at that use case as benefit for the OEM, benefit for the driver, obviously, and certainly life-saving. That, for me, ticks all the right boxes. Obviously, there is a whole bunch of delivery aspects of that needs to be worked out. But I think that is a really interesting use case. That why would we not want to do that if it made sense, and obviously the infrastructure was there to deliver it.
We have time for one more question.
So my question is going to be like a continuation of yours. And statistically, car is being parked for 96% of the time. So the car is statistically is being used for 4% of the time only. Having the vehicle API, which is promoted by COVESA, it would be also possible to provide services like car sharing services. So, for example, me as a car owner, I would be able to share my personal vehicle to other users. There are definitely a lot of limitations. We can talk about them. My question is, if you do also think about that kind of portfolio of services when vehicle can be accessed from the outside.
I can maybe answer that directly because I was, previous to Polestar, I was working at Sevd. So working with Lynk & Co. And part of the idea with the Lynk & Co. and the car sharing was the mobility as a service. So, and thank goodness the CMA platform, which is the foundation for the XC40 and also for Lynk & Co., is also the technical platform for Polestar 2. So the technical implementation actually of car sharing is very straightforward for us actually. And we're looking also into fleet as well as an area. So I can just, without giving too much information away, yes, it's very quite close that we can be utilizing those type of services. Yeah, we're talking about pure progressive performance, and we believe that is quite progressive and is good for the environment as well.
I would add to that it also depends on the cohort, because I think different OEMs appeal to different target groups. And there's going to be, let's say, high-end luxury vehicles. So, you know, Mercedes or Lamborghini or whoever else is going to be out there. And these companies are basically probably not going to be suited so easily. I wouldn't say in all respects, but like, let's say in a lot of situations where you look at it and go, okay, a person like that wouldn't really want to have someone in their car. But you have budget drivers who, let's say, for example, want to maybe, you know, have a lower cost vehicle. So enabling a service like that, this is where OEMs can get more creative. If they make their vehicles more accessible, like with regards to car sharing, maybe that'll be a really cool way where the OEM can still generate money, and they can also lower the costs of the vehicle, like vehicle acquisition for the user. So, or for the customer in that sense. So there could always be different types of kickback models where it causes a benefit for different types of parties. So in short, there's a lot of different things that one can do. And this is why I think, like, again, we talked about earlier, this ecosystem kind of scenario. We're still thinking very app-based, very modular in a way. And we got to think like a little bit bigger, like how can you affect the whole model rather than just like a very specific experience. So when we kind of as an industry evolve a little bit further on that, we can actually, you know, come up with different types of models like this.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, all of you. This has been such a great discussion. Thank you for the audience. And, well, yes, thank you for attending our panel.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.